Welcome everyone. Very, very excited about the webinar today with two friends I have known for the last 4 years really well. Both of them are extremely well connected in the startup world, not only in Los Angeles, but beyond. They both work very closely with founders, both in San Francisco and New York quite often as well. And I was gonna say, well, as you guys already heard, what I love about them is their candor and sense of humor. It's always just a fun chat with them. So I'm excited about that. And today's topic, is near and dear to all three of us. We're nerds about marketing and are all about data-driven marketing. And I've had the chance to work with David Drogos of the world, who are a lot more gut-driven marketers. And always interested in hearing perspectives on this, because while many people see it as two separate schools of thought, I don't always find it to be mutually exclusive. So I think it'll be a really interesting conversation today around that as well. But let me introduce my two esteemed panelists. So here I have with me, with the hawk flying over him, Erik Huberman, who is the founder and CEO of Hawk Media, which is a media agency that has a very interesting business model that has been able to outsource almost every arm of the marketing function that many of the brands need and work with. He's been named 30 under 30 on the Forbes list, and has also been working very hard recently in the community. Right before this, he was mentioning how he's working on a new campaign partnership with the city of Los Angeles called June Boom, where they are working to help open up a lot of the smaller businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. So I'll give it to him to give a little bit more color about the origin story, Erik. But my other panelist is my near and dear friend, co-founder, brother from another mother, is Michael Greenberg, the founder and president of Retina. He's been a successful serial entrepreneur multiple times. He specializes in B2B SaaS companies, and one of the most brilliant minds I know. He's one of the folks who has very, very high EQ and insanely high IQ at the same time, and can dive deep into a data discussion with you at any point, and then come up for air at 30,000 feet and strategize with you. Prior to Retina, Michael founded Scale Funder, which was a B2B SaaS platform, which he then sold to a very well-known private equity firm called Summit Partners in Menlo Park. But before we jump in, Erik, I'll start with Erik. Erik, did I miss anything? And would love to hear a little bit more of an origin story about Hawk Media as well.
Sure. I mean, yeah, quick origin story. I mean, you pretty much nailed it. Just to be clear, outsourcing, our people are full-time in-house, but we outsource to other companies. So meaning like they're outsourcing their marketing to us. But yeah, basically background's e-commerce, built and sold 2 e-commerce brands before this. And then about 7 years ago was advising and consulting for some brands while I figured out what I wanted to do next, and realized the pain points I dealt with at my own company were just out there in general, which is that it's hard to get access to great marketers. It's just really hard. Whether it's hiring in-house or hiring an agency, everybody's got a horror story. Everyone's been burned. Everyone's got shitty marketers they've hired internally. Everyone's got terrible agencies and snake oil salesmen. And I just hated that was the ecosystem. So kind of set out to just solve it for my immediate circle originally with a small SWAT team of people, where we just go into a brand, identify what the holes are in their marketing, and then can spin up different experts all a la carte, all month to month, whether it's a Facebook marketer, email marketer, web designer, et cetera. And 6.5 years ago, we started with 7 people, and now we're about 150. And we manage marketing for a little over 500 brands currently. And on the June Boom thing, the initiative there is actually to encourage people to jumpstart the economy. So it's not a political thing of like, we need to open. It's legitimately like, things are opening. People have been, tightened down for a couple months, and now it's time as business owners, et cetera, to really lean into this. And so apparently it resonated with the city of LA. So we're going to be working on stuff with them as well. But the idea is, how can we lean into this and actually jumpstart the economy? So that's the idea of June Boom. You can see more at juneboom.la. Feel free to nominate all your favorite businesses. We're going to be encouraging them. There's going to be grant money going into small businesses. There's going to be free promotion from us. We're going to be doing free marketing of all these businesses that are participating, just trying to encourage people to really get proactive on building their business again, restart the jobs, all that stuff. Like, let's get employment down. It's now's the time is the idea. So.
Awesome. Thanks. And Michael, did I miss anything?
No, that was great. I was blushing under my beard. I felt like I was Forbes 10 under 10 or something like that after hearing how precocious you made me sound. But no, not at all. And the only thing is, I would say regarding Retina, our origin story really came from a modernized backgrounds that we'd seen in market. That'll come up a little bit later in the conversation. But effectively, this was more around issues on customer intelligence and really being able to predict customer lifetime value early, and how thorny and difficult that is for all but maybe the largest data science teams in the world when you want to do this with accuracy at the beginning of the customer journey. So Ahmad and I saw this and faced this in our past businesses, and like many entrepreneurs, you have that thorny problem that you remember. That's what you then tackle next. So, really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, maybe I'll stick with you and maybe have you help me hear a little bit more about Retina. What is it that, how does Retina think about LTV? What does it do differently than most other businesses?
That's great. In fact, this is the old professor in me. Would you mind if we pull up that slide on LTV? Because I think this is the one thing I love to do, and especially when we're talking to a group of forward-thinking marketers or people that are in business intelligence, is actually just define this really quickly. Because I know when I talk to people about lifetime value, I hear probably 15 definitions from 14 people, right? Where, people will say, well, my lifetime value is just the last year of purchasing. I've heard that. I've heard lifetime value is just at the cohort level. So the way I like to think about it, and when I refer to it for the rest of this particular conversation, I think of it at the customer level. And I think about it as a function of a few different things in the customer journey. So if we look at this slide, you'll see the historic value, that's your realized customer purchase history. So, from your first purchase to today, however many purchases have happened, that's how we want to think about historic value, or that piece of it. Anything that might happen going forward until they churn, which is an interesting definition in and of itself, that's what we think of as residual value. When you add those two chunks together, when I'm saying customer lifetime value, that's what I mean. And we'll be talking about, how the timing between purchases, affects customer lifetime value, how you can run into problems, for instance, if you bias towards the last purchase. We'll probably be talking about recency bias. I'm sure that's going to come up. But most importantly, Retina was really built to try to predict this accurately as early as possible in the customer journey. And before Retina came into existence, the state of the art was basically having to observe multiple transactions, something like 3 or 4, before you could know what a customer's residual value, that forward value, would be worth. And while that's great for financial teams that are trying to do forecasting, that's really terrible for marketing, because you might have to wait a year or two in an observational period to know what someone's going to be worth. And as we know, you need quick feedback loops to make data-driven decisions. So we wanted to be able to give and arm marketers with the ability to know that person who just came in the door and purchased, here's what they're going to be worth going forward. So you can figure out A, was that a good acquisition? And B, how to handle them for the rest of their life cycle. So that's really what Retina is about.
Awesome. All right, Eric, I wanted to ask you about this. We've had many conversations because we've talked to several brands and we work with several brands that we've shared in the past. What is it that makes a data-driven marketer, and how do you think Hawk Media thinks about being data-driven marketers, and what makes it different?
Well, yeah, and it was just highlighted by Michael, so that's what I think is fun. Is it's not about just using data; it's how you use it, and I think that is the big purpose of this webinar. And like what you really have to think about is, just changing the idea of how you define LTV, lifetime value, changes the way you're measuring it. And what Michael just said is one practice. The 1 year I get as well, honestly, because if I'm a new business, I don't have time to know, I don't care if they're paying me in month or year 2, 3, 4, that's interesting and all, but I need to know what's going to happen this year. And I'm way more concerned. So I need to know that both numbers, honestly, is the answer to that question, so that I know long-term how my business is going to look, but short-term, which especially in an early business is so critical. Yep. You need to know what that first purchase is going to look like, when they're going to purchase their second time, third time, and how much money you're going to make there. So to answer your question more directly, and real quick, I also want to encourage the people here, feel free to ask questions. This is for you too. I need to just rant for 45 minutes, but yeah, the way to look at data is important. We're dealing with this right now, and I vented to you guys a little about this last week, and I won't call them out, but we have a client that we've been working with for 6 months, maybe a little more, and they told me, here are the metrics you have to hit. If you hit them, we have all the money in the world. And they're being honest, they're a very big company. They have a ton of money to put behind it. We hit all the metrics under best practices. We exceeded them. We have performed better than they've ever seen, no matter what way you measure it, with the advertising we're doing with them. But they have a junior marketing person there that wants to use 1 day click-through attribution on Facebook advertising. And that's the only way that they want to measure marketing. And so when they look at it that way, it's better than they've ever seen it, but it's still not profitable. Because the people, and just to be clear for those in the audience that don't know what that means, it means that they only want to measure success based on anyone that clicks the advertisements they see on Facebook and and buys something within a day, which, by the way, statistically, that is not what happens. If your average order value, meaning the average cart value you have at your company, is $50, the average timeline is 3 weeks. So to measure it on 1 day, you're missing out on the vast majority of purchases that marketing is driving, and it's logical. This is where data-driven is important. You don't want to just look at a spreadsheet. You need to take a step back and just be smart sometimes and go, should we be measuring everyone that, like, we say the first time they're introduced to a brand, they buy something? Does that make any sense? As a marketer, is that how it works? The answer is no, and it's pretty obvious. You guys have all seen advertisements for companies that took you months to buy something. So to measure it that way is crazy. And so what ends up happening here, they're actually firing us because they can't make Facebook work, is the line. And it's like, no, you're just, frankly, in this case, I kind of said it to the senior person, they're just an idiot. Like, I was like, I'm sorry, like, with all due respect, you aren't listen to what I am saying. This isn't how this works. You came to us as experts. And so in general, looking at the data properly and using it as a guide, not a rule of law, is also important, because there's a lot of nuance to data, and there's a lot of times a bigger picture that you have to pay attention to, because it's really easy to just get into spreadsheets and forget context.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing I wanted to share for the participants is we're going to make this more like a business school class. So we're going to start picking on you. I see Danielle, Liz, Taylor. So just ask questions, or else we'll pick up. I'm just kidding about that, but do ask questions. Throw them in the middle, and I'll make sure I pop them up to the panelists. And following up on that, one of the things that we're seeing right now, I'd like to get both of your opinions on, is we're seeing JCPenney, J.Crew file for bankruptcy. Yeah. It's tough times for retailers out there. While e-commerce is seeing an insane amount of growth. People are buying all this, buying is still happening. What's going on? I want to get perspectives from both of you. And maybe Michael, start with you and come back to Eric.
Sure, absolutely. So we're fortunate at Retina to be able to see a pretty large swath of businesses, from the Fortune 500 down to what I would consider the middle market. And one of the fascinating things that I'm seeing happening as a forcing mechanism is businesses that have put off digital transformation internally. So think about, bringing in those McKinsey consultants and having that 4-year strategic plan. Those plans have now been collapsed to 3 months. And so the JCPenneys of the world and other actually retailers that we've worked with that I would consider in that peer set have actually had conversations with us, and I'm sure many other technology vendors, around how to truncate this time frame. And the reason for it is this: all of a sudden omnichannel became solo channel, but demand didn't evaporate. In fact, what I'm seeing happening is there has been a demand shift that is stressing e-commerce for those businesses that weren't born natively in e-commerce. So for the companies we work with, like Madison Reed, or for companies like Glossier, the ones that started natively in e-commerce and then moved into actually experiential retail, they're doing exceptionally well. They were able to turn off retail with a relatively low footprint hit, and to Erik's earlier point, already have a very strong sense of metrics and how to manage their business. Where they're getting stressed, and we can talk about this later, is actually more on customer success and supply chain. But they have a very good sense of how to handle demand spikes and really give a great transactional and checkout experience. On the flip side, the JCPenneys and J.Crews of the world are showing that brand is no longer enough if you don't have a strong e-commerce strategy. And I don't view this with glee. I do think it is a tough time in the market that's stressing this kind of adaptation. But to put this very frankly, if you don't have the ability to do three things, and I leave these 3 points. Customer identity resolution, which goes to what Eric said. Can you detect if someone bounces on your site and comes back a week later that they're from the same Facebook campaign? If you don't have that muscle, then you're in big trouble. Do you have the ability to figure out what they're worth when they transact, either 1 year out or 5 years out, depending on what your payback windows are? If you don't have that muscle, you're going to be in trouble not having these data feedback loops on measuring campaign effectiveness. And then finally, do you have the ability to behaviorally segment the customers? So you're knowing what creative is actually working as you cycle through this new post-COVID era. We are all, now kind of gleefully and cynically laughing at the "we're all in this together" narrative. But as you see, if you have a tone-deaf strategy on top of it, you're going to have problems. So that's how I would look at this. I think that we're seeing a lot of strength with the native e-commerce brands, and retailers who are getting it right, like Nordstrom, had already put those puzzle pieces in place.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think about this, Eric?
Yeah, I think the bankruptcies you've seen at this point, even with Hertz last week, like these were all companies, it just accelerated it. Like JCPenney hadn't innovated in a long time. Hertz, like Uber is replacing these rental companies already. Like this is not, and they're just restructuring. I think that's the important thing to remember too with bankruptcies is a lot of times just a restructuring. They're not going out of business. They're just restructuring their debt because they got over levered by usually private equity partners that put a ton of debt on the balance sheet. And now they can't make those debt obligations because they don't have as much money coming in. Like that's, just to be real, Hertz is not going away. They're just offloading a bunch of cars to cover a bunch of debt, negotiating down their debt in a court of law and starting over. Like it'll be come back as something different and probably stronger. And that's what happens here. So it's not great for the people that put money into it and the people that lent them money, but that's the people that are hurt most of the time in those kind of things. The other thing, which Michael alluded to in a lot of ways, like e-commerce is crushing it right now.
Yeah.
So like e-commerce is up something like 210% in a month. Like, and that's an average. So we're seeing that personally. We have hundreds of companies we're managing e-com for. Like, there's a few reasons for that. I know we're going to talk more about this, but the cost to market dropped significantly. So meaning Facebook ads, Google ads, they all dropped about 30% in terms of cost. Mostly because the companies they increased about 100% over the past year. So it's almost down to where it was, 2 years. And the reason it increased so much is because automotive, CPG, and these big in travel all jumped really heavy into digital. 2018 was the first time that people spent more money on marketing digitally than they did traditionally. And so that transition got really expensive. All those big companies pulled out of marketing because they're really reactive with these kind of things, and they just cut everything to start and then slowly come back, which is really good news for small and medium businesses on the marketing side because your marketing costs are negligible compared to what they were, and it's going to be a while before they go back up. So you've got some time there. And on top of that, people are still purchasing. Like there's a whole economic side of this. And that's why like when I see JCPenney going bankrupt, that's not a sign of, how bad the economy is going to be to me. Like that sucks. It's going to create unemployment. It's a problem there. But to me, that's just like, yeah, it was a shitty company. Sorry, I'm being blunt, but like shitty company that didn't adapt and didn't like, has anyone ever been to jcpenney.com? Like, I don't think they did anything.
I don't know if that exists.
I don't either, to be honest. It probably does, but I've never been on it. And I've bought on other, their competitors on Macy's, et cetera. But it's the lack of adapting, like that's what killed them. And that to me is just, it's not surprising. And it got heavily accelerated, but it was only a matter of time. And so, what we're seeing is the other side, which is people that did adapt. You mentioned Nordstrom's, et cetera. They're doing great. There's a reason the market is almost back, is like these, consumer purchase. And so that goes into more something that a lot of people aren't really recognizing that I haven't seen talked about a lot. They're dumping $1,200 of extra money into everyone's bank account. Plus their unemployment's over double what it usually is, meaning went from $450 to $1,150 a month if you're unemployed right now. And people are heavily unemployed that don't normally even make that kind of money. So you're getting huge subsidies, and companies got infused with enough to cover 2.5 months of payroll. It's real money. Like there's more money in people's savings account on average in the US than there has been in 30 years. That is a stat. And so that means people, like generally, especially the lower and middle class, they spend 110% of their cash. They spend more than they have. They leverage. And so when they get more money, they spend it. There's things they want to buy. So like we're seeing consumer spending going up, and it's they show this. Again, this is the perfect example of being careful with data. You see things like consumer spending's down 15%. It's like, yeah, because travel is 0. But what is it per category? Because per category is not. Same thing in terms of what I just said about the stock market. The stock market is up, but that's because of the big tech companies. Most companies are actually down and down 20%. Like if you look at it from a case-by-case basis, it's down as a market because it's such a big part of our market are the biggest companies in the country, which are all thriving right now, Facebook, Google, Amazon, et cetera. Like they're doing really well in this. So that's driving the stock market as a whole up, but these individual companies are still struggling a little bit. So all of this is, again, you need to look at the data points and what they actually mean. But what I'm seeing is most companies are hit a little bit. The companies that are hyper affected, hospitality, travel, are obviously hit hard. Today, they're up a lot, by the way, because they're seeing that people are not as concerned as the media is about this thing. And over, Memorial weekend, people traveled a shitload and things are opening up pretty quickly. So, I think we're going to see, the companies that are going to really go bankrupt, really go out are companies that were on their way there anyways. And a lot are going to be able to resuscitate out of this.
Got it. So it sounds like, most companies that had been on a digital or data transformation that were on the retail side are speeding it up to get to e-commerce. And then e-commerce companies are just doing bonkers to begin with. And if they have the data infrastructure in place, as Michael said, then they have a lot to gain through this time.
Yeah, our average client in April doubled their revenue.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, I was having to get on the phone with many CEOs talking them off a cliff about cutting everything. It's like, don't do it. It's going to be all right.
Yeah.
Literally doubled in April.
Yeah. I mean, I was on a call with a friend who's at Amazon, and he's like, they typically do holiday season planning, and now they're seeing holiday every day. Every day feels like a holiday season, holiday season sales. One of the things that right before this pandemic hit, I was reading Ray Dalio's book, and I'm going to read a quote from his book that I read, and it stuck with me. It says, "People are biased by recent history and overlook events that haven't happened in a long time, perhaps not even in our lifetimes, but they will happen again." I wanted to bring this up because there's two types of biases that we like. We have a recency bias, and I want to hear like your opinions on how that's impacting decision making on both for being too recency biased and not being enough recency biased, and would love to hear your thoughts on it. Maybe start with Michael and come back to Eric.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It actually might be worth bringing that image up again of LTV, because I think it'll help really help us drill down on this in a practical way. So when we look at each one of those hash marks here for purchase, and you'll see that there's this churn probability that as you fade from green, you slowly fade into that yellow color. And then if enough time elapses, you go to red. Within a lot of these machine learning models and buy till you die models, which are the names of these underlying models that predict customer lifetime value or that residual value, one of the factors of it is this thing called intertransaction time, which makes instinctual sense. The longer it's been since a person's purchased, the more likely they might be to have left you or to have churned. However, because there are larger rhythms in purchasing cycles, like seasonality, for instance, you might have people that for a clothing business only shop that semi-annual sale, or you might have special anchor events like the Super Bowl that drive certain kinds of traffic. We can't just rely on recency as the only metric. We have to look at things a little bit more globally and look at patterns in this intertransaction time. So recency bias that I've seen is when people use some sort of proxy mechanism of, if a customer hasn't purchased in the last X amount of months, they must have churned, or I'm going to use a win back campaign on them when they may actually still be an active customer. Those are the kinds of incorrect decisioning I've seen when you don't have the ability to make this kind of data-driven decisioning. And the cost of this is both lack of optimization in your campaigns. Like I said, you're putting them in the wrong bucket and possibly messaging them incorrectly, but also B, you're not really understanding the actual value of the customer that was acquired. Back to Erik's point, is this someone who's coming back yearly, coming back multiple times a year? And when they're telling you, hey, I didn't make a profit on first purchase and they haven't come back in 3 months, if you're not able to say, well, this person's actually on a 6-month, 12-month, or 18-month cycle, you might assume that was a bad acquisition. So that's where I see recency bias really rear its ugly head. And, obviously in questions, we can parse that a bit more. But that's what the goal of having these new, more cutting edge approaches are. It's to move away from RFM modeling or recency bias that you would see in a lot of businesses.
Yeah, it sounds like recency can bias you to make incorrect decisions at the individual customer level if you don't account for it.
That's right. And when you don't have these kinds of predictive capabilities, oftentimes that's all you do. You just group customers by cohort and age them out based on when they last purchased.
Yeah. Eric, what do you think about, so one of the things I'm also concerned about this recency bias creeping in is people's ad spend behavior or people's decision making at the business level, how they're changing that, thinking about the impact of the overestimating or underestimating the impact of this pandemic.
Yeah, and I think that has been more damaging than the actual pandemic. And I'm not talking about on health-wise, I'm talking about economically. Just to be clear, guys, I get that this is I think there's a lot of tendency to talk about this from a business standpoint and forget about the disease side. I'm very aware of that, and it's terrible. And the New York Times article and everything, this is a real travesty of what's happening here. But on the economic side, and again, I want to separate the two, I think people have overreacted. I think people, the note that came out, I think it was Sequoia, a VC, put out a note that's they were the ones that wrote The Music Stopped in 2008. That's Sequoia, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so they wrote some article in March that's cut everything, basically. And everybody passed it around, and every VC took it, and every private equity fund told everyone to cut everything. And thank God we, argued about it, because we told our companies to do differently. Because company that listened to that didn't go digital or didn't adapt quickly and double down in going to it, just missed out on a huge opportunity. We have a venture fund too. Our portfolio, for the most part, has seen ridiculous growth through this because we're no, double down, get into it. Marketing's cheaper. People are still spending money. Go. And if you didn't do that, you just lost market share. You lost ground. It's a competitive market, and any of these VC and private equity companies that listened are getting screwed if they're not reacting. I mean, you lose a month, but they missed a big opportunity on doubling their business in a month. And I don't think that goes away either. And so, what I like to look at with this is work with the data you have and don't get emotional about it. And that's what we kept telling our clients to do. And what we kept trying to push was everyone was predicting that nobody was going to buy anything, but it wasn't what we were seeing. For a couple of days we saw dips, but we don't want to make a decision on a couple of days anyways. And I was worst case scenario, you spend money for a week trying to catch up. You don't make as much of a return on it as you normally would. And then we start to pull back if we see some reaction. And again, we saw none of that, but then we had many companies just cut everything out of fear, and that they will not recover. And that is the common thing we hear in just marketing in general, is people make these reactionary decisions and cut things or change things. Yeah. And they love to say, well, if we're wrong, we'll just come back and change it back. It's no. If you're wrong, you're going to lose. You're going to struggle as a business. You're not going to have the option to just turn it back on because you're going to lose money. You're going to get underwater. I've been doing this for a long time. It's not just an easy reset button when you make a change in your business. And so when you shut off all marketing, what we kept telling these people is you're going to cut off your oxygen. And it's not you can just, turn it all back on again and it's all hunky-dory. That's not how this works in this sense. It takes a lot. And I'll just to explain that, if you stop driving customers today, not only did you lose all the momentum you get from marketing, again, purchase cycle. If it takes 3 weeks to get a purchase and you cut it off today, you'll have some trickle in over the next 3 weeks, month and a half, whatever, but that whole time you're not filling your pipeline. And then you're not making revenue. So now you're underwater. So now you're losing money as a business. Yeah. You're declining. You don't have the cash flow to maintain it. You then want to turn marketing back on, but you don't even have the cash holdings because you've lost a bunch of money to actually turn it back on to the fullest. So maybe you can turn it back on a little bit, but still you've got a lag time on the performance of that, which you have to survive through and then slowly work your way back up. A 3-week decision will last months before you recover. And that's the issue with all this.
Well, going along those lines, what I was going to ask is, so what are the data points you're seeing that people should be paying attention to? You mentioned that CPAs have gone down by 30%. how much of that is
So
here
not
to stay?
CPA, CPCs, CP,
Got it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Got
CPCs, CPMs, and then CPAs have gone down by about 20% across the board because conversion rate went down about 10%.
So what should they be looking at, and how should marketers or marketers or even analysts who are helping their marketers make decisions on where to spend the money? Like what data should they be looking at, and how should they be making that decision?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different kind of guards here. One is the companies that are already doing a lot and already tracking it well. And for those guys, manage it the same way. Like, look at like what's performing. Treat it all of this like, and this is what we said 2 months ago, and this worked out well. Treat it like you're launching a new campaign. Like, test different audiences, test different creative and copy, try things, and see what resonates, and go with it. You know, like now and it was brought up already. The whole "we're in this together" and all those kind of lines are definitely not working. They worked really well in mid-March. They really did. It's all the people in mid-April that jumped on the bandwagon after it was already used are the problem. Mid-March, that is what people wanted to hear. And so being super nimble and adjusting, and again, this is where the lack of data comes in too, where it's like you may not have enough time to gather data, and you just have to make a smart decision of what does your customer want to hear right now that's going to get them to buy. At this point, if you're selling consumer goods, it's again optimism, looking to the future. Like that's what I don't want to hear any more about the coronavirus. I don't want to hear any more about like, we're in this together and I've got, I hope you're getting through these uncertain times or whatever bullshit people automate and send you. Like none of that. It should be like, I'm ready to get out. I'm ready to do this. Safety. Again, I'm very much not, I actually don't disagree with what the city of LA is doing in this. So like, I'm a little more liberal, conservative, I guess conservative on opening up, liberal from a politics standpoint in the way this is working. But I do think like we're hearing it. They opened retail in California, which, like they're opening it up with precautions, but the idea is now you want to be optimistic. You want to say like, hey, it's coming back. Like what we're doing with June Boom that was mentioned, like let's encourage people to do something. Like, hey, get out for the weekend. Go. That doesn't mean go jump in a crowd in a pool with 500 people like they did at the W in Scottsdale this weekend. But like you can go outside. You can go get some fresh air. You can go for a run, like those kind of things. And so depending on your brand, like speaking to that, I think is really the way to adjust to what has, and again, that's the lack of data side of this. And then the data side, data to watch is quickly watch how those numbers compare to your past numbers. What is your click-through rate? What is your conversion rate? What is your, return? And you should be able to, again, see quickly how those things are catching on and test different things and just be super iterative right now. Or normally I'd say give it a few weeks, play it out because you're looking for more long-term scalable marketing approaches. Right now, it's actually more urgent just for your business. Things are changing too fast to create scalability. When we go back to, I'm going to use another cliche, the new normal, it's literally on, I have CNBC playing in the background. It's Tillman Fertitta on the new normal in the US. So another cliche, when we get back to whatever that is, and like we start to like really feel like something that we're going to be doing for a year, then you go back to the more long-term data-driven marketing of scalability and figuring out what can you do that you can build off of. But right now, it's about more just being scrappy and iterative. Yeah.
So it sounds like two things you mentioned that are sticking out to me. One is on the intuition. You want to be authentic and bold when you can be and actually spend, and then be very reactive and iterative to what data is coming in, is what it sounds like. And you mentioned 20% lower CPAs. That means that by default ROAS, or return on ad spend, is up, right? Even if you're getting the same value out of
significantly up. I mean,
right?
Yeah, it's your CAC should be down 20% plus, and we're seeing that across the board. This is not like an anecdotal thing. This is real. And I don't think it's coming, again, I don't think it's like a 1 month thing. I don't think that Unilever and Toyota and Carnival Cruises are doubling down on marketing again. Expedia said they're discounting their marketing budget $3.5 billion this year. So that money is it's competitive. How Facebook, how Google works, it's a bidding system. So it's how much the bidders are willing to pay. When all the big bidders drop out, it gets cheap.
Yep. So if that's what's going on, Michael, I have a question for you. Look, if the CPAs are going down, how much should we still care about the top of the equation, which is lifetime value?
Yeah, no, so it's a fair question. And I think that if CPAs were going down to the point where you were profitable at first purchase, right? Not just ROAS, but for the business, that you were actually kicking off unit economic profit on each purchase, then I would say, for those businesses, you can, for instance, take your foot off of the proverbial pedal on trying to figure out what a customer's downstream LTV is. Now, you still would want to do that exercise, but you at least know you're not losing money on the customers. However, here's the issue. For the most part, that's still not the case. Most businesses don't fall into that category of being profitable at first purchase. And so for that large swath of businesses, it's still important to know, was the customer that you just brought in actually a profitable customer? You may be acquiring them for a lower amount, so that ratio has just improved, but you're not necessarily still having someone who's profitable. And to give you an example of why this also matters, Eric was talking about the analysis paralysis that these CEOs that get on phone calls with him are experiencing. Well, part of that issue is when you're doing these kinds of acquisition campaigns, if a large swath of your customers, it turns out, are still net not profitable for you, then they're business poison, like point blank. And I know the conversation I'm constantly getting is, I have a lot of one and dones. In good times, I still have a lot of one and dones. They will always exist inside of a marketing funnel. How do I know what this COVID cohort is? And as Eric said, first of all, test. You have to test. But secondly, there are other ways to figure that out. Yes, there will be some migration of people finding your brand because they were dislocated from some other brand or purchasing pathway. But what that means is you now have an onus to retain them. You should be thinking about this opportunistically, not as something where they will regress back into that prior behavior. So when I hear, especially when Eric says Carnival Cruise Lines or some of the big CPGs have lowered their budget, opening up this amazing and frankly, somewhat unique window for acquisition for these other brands, not only should you be aggressive in going into it, but you should be looking at some of these segmentation models that we talked about earlier and lifetime value models. So you know who looks like in this cohort some of your best customers, and thus apply strong retention and appeasement strategies against them. If you know that they look like that customer that's worth $200, $300, or $400 downstream for you, then you should be trying to retain them accordingly up to a certain dollar amount that's profitable. Not just saying, we got them in, we think it's just organic, and we'll probably bleed them out again, and therefore we are not building a strategy on retention. So one thing I've seen a lot of very smart CEOs in this space say is they're doubling down on retention strategies as well. Not just acquisition, but they're viewing this as a hold the line activity. I have all of these amazing customers coming in. What should I be doing? And this brings me to a very interesting problem I'm seeing with the successful e-commerce businesses, which is customer success or customer service is being degraded. So how many places have you been to? I know I can count quite a few brands where, because I was dislocated from the product and stream that I would normally buy it at, I would go to them and then they would tell me, oh, sorry, it's not 2-day shipping anymore. It's going to be 3-week shipping. And I would go, wait a minute. It says on your site as I'm going through this, 2-day shipping, that's what's promised. And at the end, I'm getting a pop-up. I get that they're experiencing a demand surge. Well, the smartest people that we're working with are doing this. They're able to predict lifetime value early when I'm at checkout and able to say, I will move this person up the queue or down the queue accordingly so that I have a better shot at retaining them. It's exactly what airlines did before this. If I was executive platinum and my flight got canceled, I would be serviced before someone else on getting a new flight. Why is that? I'm worth more, and therefore they want to give me a better customer experience.
Well, you can afford to. That's the big part. It's not that they want to. It's that
they can afford to. That's exactly right. They can afford to. But if you don't know, don't know what that person category, what they're falling into, then you can't give them that higher class of experience and say, we'll at least bring them up the queue, for instance, on shipping. And those small things make a big difference on your retention numbers and therefore LTV. So hopefully that was helpful, Ahmad, on explaining some of the ways I'm seeing it matter.
Yeah, and it definitely matters. I mean, I think this is, again, back to where like data is important to inform, and being smart is important as well. Like, think about why these companies, e-commerce companies, are doubling. They're doubling because people can't go to the store, and so they're going, okay, well, here's the other option. I want to spend money. Now think about the logic of, okay, so now you got a bunch of people that didn't traditionally buy online because we saw such a surge, that are now buying online. Do we think all of those people go back and just go back to their old habits? All of them? And it just goes back, like, the number I'll give you is 13% of purchases consumer purchases last year were done online, 87% in store. In the past 6 weeks, it's been 30% online, 13 to 30% market share overnight. Do we think that goes back to 13? Because I think all logic would point to absolutely not. Right. Does it go down a little bit? Absolutely. And who knows what that is? Is it 20? Maybe. Is it 15? Is it 25? Who knows what it is, but it's not all the way back down. And so now you've got this golden goose, so to speak, in terms of what happened from an e-commerce perspective, that if you're seeing those numbers, it is your duty to do everything you can to make it not go back down. Yep. That's what you're fighting against. And the better you can do it with that, when you have super cheap cost to acquire a customer and a lot of opportunity to retain and just this surge in business, the better you can do that, the more you're setting yourself up for long-term success. So like LTV is all that matters. And CAC LTV ratio is what every private equity firm looks at. That is the two main factors in a business. And when your CAC goes down, if the higher you can get your LTV and the lower your CAC, the better your business is. So right now you've got the fortunate situation that CAC is super low and potentially LTV can be the same or greater. And I don't think that there's like a label I'd put on COVID. I don't think COVID customers are going to be worse. They're definitely not going to be worse customers, in my opinion. You're going to have a few of them that maybe go back to their old habits, but a lot of them have the same potential. And then at the heart of a business, what matters? They like your product.
That's right.
If you have a good product, you had the opportunity to introduce yourself to a ton of new customers that wouldn't have normally bought it. If you send them something they like, you've got a loyal customer.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. And, we often get asked, like, how do you model for coronavirus? Like, how do you model LTV for that? And this is where I think what Michael mentioned is that customer experience right now, like there is obviously like some level of like prediction you are able to do and some you're not, but customer experience sounds like making that will impact your customer equity in the long run in a very positive way, and not taking your pedal off the gas is important for that.
Well, and I think there's actually an easy answer to that. So coronavirus, what it did do is any prior LTV models went out the window, because we talked about this early on too with our customers. Like there is a truth to this where like every single company that is in enough scale lost customers through this, because you're going to have people that churn. You're going to have, if you have any restaurants, any gyms, anything, like if you're a B2B business, any of the companies that are hyper affected might churn. If you're a B2C business, any of the people that work at those companies that were customers of yours might churn. So you're going to have a higher churn in the month of April than you normally would, in terms of like a lot of those customers might have, if you have a recurring revenue business, et cetera, you might have lost a lot of those customers. So you have to replace them with new ones. But going forward, I don't think those numbers are as volatile. I think the volatility happened with your existing customer base and when coronavirus hit, and that first month, that mid-March to mid-April, a lot of companies are affected. And this is what we've seen firsthand. And then from mid-April kind of to now, you've seen slow readoption and slow new adoption. And then I think, come June, which is why we're doubling down on it, will be that real recovery time, that as long as we don't see some huge resurgence, I think we're going to be seeing a pretty quick recovery here.
Yeah. I'll have one more question and then I'll turn it over to the audience questions. If you're seeing increase in demand, what should you do from a marketing and supply chain perspective?
I mean, I kind of already alluded a little bit to, rank ordering your shipping practices based on LTV where possible, even if you have to tranche it and make guesses on who your best LTV customers are. Some people might go as low as just saying cart order as a proxy for that, but cart order value. But that being said, let me get a little more strategic and nuanced here really quickly. There's a business that we work with that I can call out for this. It's very positive, called Madison Reed. And, Walmart recently just issued this incredible report that said what phase of the recovery we're in, or what phase of COVID we're in. And they call it the hair color phase. Right? We started off with the bottled water and toilet paper phase, and now people are at, they've been in shelter in place long enough that they're worried about coloring their hair and they want to color it at home. Madison Reed is one of the leading hair coloring products for women, and they sell it online. So they're seeing this massive surge. And what they've done, which I thought was brilliant, and I urge all businesses with alacrity to do this, is they've merged their org so that the customer success team and the retention CRM team have now been merged together under lifecycle management. And to me, that always made sense. Customer success and experience was always part of the retention narrative. And I thought it was crazy that they were separated out with separate KPIs and separate OKRs. So first things first, I would have that hard conversation with those heads of your leadership to figure out how they're reinforcing each other. That could also be for customer service tickets. So if you're using Zendesk or Customer or Thankful or any of the other great leading platforms that are helping serve this, the same thing I said about supply chain, you can also rank order and tailor your appeasement strategy based on what that customer's predicted value is going to be. And this is for businesses where you don't have enough capital to give everyone this high level premium experience. And you do have to make those hard decisions during this particular period of, demand spiking. So that's how I would think about it strategically. And then at the tactical level, look at ways that you can change your strategy based on signals so you can get to your best customers first. That would be a high level way I would think about it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And Eric, what do you think about from a marketing spend? If you're seeing an increase in demand, should you just continue to invest more in marketing or do it differently?
Yeah, because increase in demand. So you always have to remember that it is a competitive landscape. Someone's going to spend their money on you or someone else. And so when you see an increase in demand, you can let your competitor have that demand or you can. And it's a land grab in that sense. And so I believe when you see it, like you have a big opportunity here, because this is the nice thing if you're a proactive business leader or someone that's sort of, I've heard the term wartime CEO. Like if you're ready to march into this, a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are holding on. A lot of people are emotional about this. I've seen so many people act in emotional reaction to this that they haven't been able to get out of their own way. And so you have an increase in demand for a lot of these businesses, and a lot of your competitors are backing off. Yeah, double down. Your cost to advertise is cheaper. Your cost to market is cheaper. Now's the time to grab. It's making hay when the sun shines. It's a cliche, another cliche that's great. Like that is what you would be doing right now if you're doubling down. And do I know what's going to happen in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months to the economy, et cetera? No. But right now, what the data tells us is it's a good time. And if that starts to tell us the other way, then act accordingly. But don't making emotional decisions is a problem right now because it's going to drive you to do anything.
Cool. Awesome. I see a few questions here from the audience. Let me share a few. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to all of them, but let me ask some of them. So as retail stores slowly reopen, how will brands change their marketing strategy? Is that something that you've been thinking about, Eric?
As retail stores reopen, I think that a lot of these retail stores are going to, should stay heavy in digital, just because we don't know what reopening is going to look like yet. My favorite is the guidance of the CDC around going back to school for anyone that has kids. Basically it's not tenable for a young kid. You can't share anything. You can't touch anyone. You can't, you want to try to tell a 3-year-old to social distance, it's just not tenable. So as I think it's not going to be clean and easy. So I think, listen, the interesting thing I saw is Kohl's reopened in a lot of locations, and they saw 50% of the revenue come back immediately, over 50%, without doing any marketing around it. So what I believe is brick and mortar is a lot more for the impulse buy, for the I need this right now kind of buy. And as people know stores are back open, I think you're going to get that business back. But I think a lot of these stores are realizing they really need to subsidize, online shouldn't be 13%, it should be 25, 30%. And still, I talked about this using ketchup as an example. I buy ketchup when I'm making food and I'm shit, we're out of ketchup, and I run down to the market. That's more normal behavior. Is a lot of people buy things when it's I need this right now. I'm not ordering it for future, et cetera. That's still the majority of purchases. So retail will come back in a lot of ways from that. From a marketing standpoint, I think, again, it's a mix, because I don't think it hurts you to say both. I think you market online and tell people they can go in store versus market in store and then online's an afterthought. I think that's a mistake a lot of these brands have made.
And Ahmad, I actually have a quick thought on this based on some readings that have come to light and some CEOs that we've spoken with. So you can look at sort of two paradigms that happened before. One was those e-commerce native brands that went into retail to support it. So, Eric was talking a little bit about you can't let go of digital during this time. Well, many brands, much like I'll bring up Glossier and Rent the Runway again, used retail as an experiential event to support digital transactions. So the store itself was not where the transaction was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be for brand alignment, brand awareness, and experience of the brand. I'm now also looking at that married with how some of the larger big box retailers like Best Buy have operated during COVID and what that means. So right now you have same day pickup if you want it at a place like Best Buy. And anecdotally, many of my friends who have shopped there have really enjoyed the experience of buying online, not wanting to wait 2 days for the shipping, going in and actually having an associate meet them in the parking lot at their car in a tight queue and driving away. Well, what does that mean? When speaking with them, they said there were 3 things they never want to experience again in the store. The line at the queue, right? You're queuing for checkout. 2, having to go around mass volumes of redundant inventory to find what you need. And then finally, this ability to either buy immediately and experience that instant gratification of having the product same day, or having the option call of having it shipped to your home. So if that's the case, I imagine what we'll see is, and actually there has been internal leaks around this recently, that we're going to see retail rents drop by 50%. So one of the largest commercial real estate brokers in the US recently leaked this. Secondly, I think we're going to see that footprint in the store is going to go less to inventory and more to experience. So you won't see 90 million different copies of that, particular game, and you won't see 15 fridges. You're going to see some sort of experience around those particular items, and the actual transaction and inventory will be happening offline and in a more demand side real-time way. So I imagine that's how retail will morph, and we'll see a massive accelerant towards that.
Got it.
I do think that the showroom model, though, you have to be careful, because then there becomes very little reason to go. Because you can do that digitally. So I don't think the full showroom model is actually going to be I want to go pick it up is why people go into the store. So I've seen a lot of mistakes with that, where it's they have one of every shirt and they're like, oh, well, we can order it for you and send it to you. Reminds me of the
Bonobos
on eBay thing in 40-Year-Old Virgin, where it's here, can I just take it with me?
Right.
So I don't think the showroom model works, but I do think the experience needs to change. I don't think, as you said, having 10 copies of a CD, you should be able to go look at what's out the CD. I just said CD, but you just need to go look at and see what's there. And then they should have storage in the back or whatever. I think that becomes an interesting way.
Yep. Gentlemen, we're almost at the top of the hour. I know many of us will have a meeting right at noon. So I'll give you guys both, what is the one key takeaway you'd like the audience to take away in maybe 30 seconds or slightly more? And start with Eric, and I'll come back to Michael.
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is the context of data. Don't read data as a standalone thing. When you're looking at your data, really use your brain power and take a second to really think through what this data actually means. Because no data is perfect. And even when you're looking at LTV data with Retina, why? Ask why. Why does it say this? Why could this be wrong? What could affect this negatively? What could make this muddy? And really challenge yourself to look at your data that way. Because it's, there's also a confirmation bias where if it says what you want it to say, you're just yeah, cool, it's great. Our LTV is great. We've got, six times its original purchase in LTV. We have a $50 CAC and $600 LTV. Challenge yourself, on what period of time does that cycle make sense? Whatever the things that could be skewing that, et cetera. Did you have one person go buy $5 million for the product and then your actual LTV is really $100? All that analysis becomes super important, which I know Retina helps with, but that in general, just when you're thinking about data, remember that data lives in the real world. It's not a spreadsheet. So how does that what does that actually mean? It's super important.
Yeah, Ahmad, I would just to quickly piggyback off that, I would absolutely say that this is now a time where you have more tools than ever at your disposal, both internally and externally, and also more people sharing resources. This is almost, we're in kind of a golden era, both from a webinar standpoint and people kind of sharing everything they know, from tips and tricks all the way to, vendors revealing their quote unquote secret sauce. There are answers out there for whatever it is that you're suffering from, or this analysis paralysis you might be feeling. Inaction, in my opinion, has been the one sure shot way that we're seeing negative results, period, point blank, from all of the people that we work with. And so if, for instance, you're worried about not acquiring a customer that will have a payback window that's palatable, all the way to figuring out, what your strategy should be on retaining them, I would recommend that you both reach out to those people that you think are experts in the field, but also realize that not doing so over the next 4 to 6 weeks in this particular heightened time may prevent a lost opportunity you won't recoup. Because as Eric said, there is a bit of a land grab going on. There is a bit of greenfield advantage, and inaction is more than just lost revenue. Is probably going to be permanently lost customers that are migrating over to other brands. So I definitely would recommend not having an action during this time.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It was really awesome to kind of hear both of your thoughts on both intuition and data-driven decision-making around marketing. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as well. It's always great to chat with you guys, and especially have a structured conversation around this topic. So really appreciate Eric and Michael taking the time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ahmad. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys. Bye.